All right, well, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And for folks that join while we're in progress, the webinar is going to be recorded, so it will be posted to the YouTube channel under IlliniCloud. So why don't we go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the next session in the IlliniCloud webinar series featuring ThinkCERCA, increasing rigor through close reading and augmented writing. My name is Pannu. I'm the business and operations lead for IlliniCloud, and joining us today is Kavita Venkatesh. She's a Ph.D. and director of professional learning and school design. This is an interactive session, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and depending on kind of how we're going through the presentation, Kavita can either take those questions in stride or queue them up for the end of the presentation, depending on how things go. As a reminder, and as I mentioned earlier, the IlliniCloud webinars are recorded and posted to the IlliniCloud YouTube channel. So that's ILLINI Cloud. So if you just type that into the YouTube search bar, you should be able to pull up the IlliniCloud channel and see this, not only this webinar, but all previous webinars that have been conducted to date. The IlliniCloud webinars are also on a regular cadence of Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Central Time. So invites come out usually a week before. So if you want to reserve that time for these sessions, please feel free to do so. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kavita. And Kavita, please feel free to introduce yourself and share your screen, and let's get started.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, can hear you fine.
All right, fantastic. So I am really excited about this webinar. So we're going to be talking about increasing rigor and thinking about close reading and argumentative writing, and really setting a comprehensive literacy program, whether it's in a classroom, a school, a district. So I hope that through this webinar, you'll both learn something and take away something in terms of practice. And then as Jat mentioned, I work for ThinkCERCA, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And so I'll weave in a little bit around ThinkCERCA and what we do, as well as how these strategies can connect to assessments that students might be taking. So I have a few screenshots from assessments built in, so you can see the big picture, not just about practice today and tomorrow, but how it really prepares our students for college and career success, including those assessments that they are responsible and expected to take when they are in grade school and in high school. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment, and I ask for just a few moments of flexibility while I make sure that I can get my screen shared, as well as making sure that I can keep the chat open. So one moment. All right, so the chat open. Can everyone see my screen?
We can.
And I just lost the chat because I went into presentation mode. All right, so I lost the chat. So I'm going to probably toggle back and forth between sharing my entire screen and closing it down to just the browser so that I can pull up the chat. So before I get started, just a few logistics, and then I'll do an introduction of myself. So as we go through this webinar, if you have questions, if you can chat them in, I will take a few hopefully natural breaks throughout the webinar and jump into the chat and talk about some of the questions that you had. And additionally, if you have suggestions and for practice, I do something X, Y, and Z, or teachers or administrators in my district do X, Y, Z, please share those as well. I think that's always a great opportunity when there is a bit of interaction in webinars. And so feel free to chat that in as well. And so please do that. And I'll take about 2 breaks. I think will be the best way to go about it. And then at the very end, obviously we'll pause and take or when I end, we'll take a full opportunity to take questions and answers. So a very brief introduction, and then I will get started. I'm sure other people will also be joining over the next few moments anyway. So as Jat mentioned, my name is Kavita Venkatesh. I am the Director of Professional Learning and School Design at ThinkCERCA. I've been at ThinkCERCA for a year now, which is exciting. I just moved to, ThinkCERCA is based in Chicago, and I just moved to Chicago right before I started working here. I worked in the Boston Public Schools for a while. I was a classroom teacher, I was a school leader, and then I managed the district's curriculum and instruction department. In Boston, it is called Instructional Research and Design. But it's basically, the math department, the ELA department, all content departments that are in all of the schools in the Boston Public Schools. And I have a Ph.D. in curriculum and instruction, and my focus was really around teacher preparation and the Universal Design for Learning framework. And so while I will not be talking about either of those things here, I think that when we think about strategies for supporting for increasing growth and supporting growth in schools, there is obviously a critical component there of making sure that teachers and administrators, either at the school or the district level, or even the state level, do have some of the supports that they need to be successful. So I am going to get started, and I'll start with an agenda. If at any point you have difficulty hearing me, you can chat that in, or Jat, if you can say something, that way I can figure out what to do differently. I'm wearing headphones with a speaker attached because I think it will eliminate some of the background noise of the L that is very close to the office. So we'll start with a quick overview. I am going to talk about developing a comprehensive literacy program. Then we'll jump into closing the achievement gap. The very end, I have something called what I was going to call a ThinkCERCA demonstration. And what I really wanted to do there is jump into the ThinkCERCA product and share with you all what the product is, what it looks like. I will do this really briefly unless there are a handful of questions, and in which case I can dig into that even more. So as I jump into the content of this webinar, I do want to set the context of, why is a company like ThinkCERCA doing a webinar on this topic? So ThinkCERCA is a literacy platform, and we focus on academic writing. I'm jumping through two slides, or toggling between two slides here. And our founder and CEO, Eileen Murphy, was a teacher and a leader in the Chicago Public Schools. And along with these experts that you see, and I'm sure many of you have met them, been to presentations, have read their books, attended courses that they've taught. These are really the experts that have been the underlying work of ThinkCERCA. And so the purpose of ThinkCERCA is that we are an academic writing solution through what we call the CERCA Framework, where students are engaging in writing a claim, evidence, reasoning, counter-argument, and audience. And so thinking about how all of that can really lead to critical thinking and literacy skills with each of those components, as well as how they all fit together. And so ideas around argumentation and increasing rigor in the classroom are really at the core of what we do as a company, both in terms of our product as well as how we provide professional development, training, and support to teachers, schools, districts around the country. So to shift into this idea of argumentation, why argumentation? What's the value of it? I think that we all are aware that our standards do put a particular emphasis on this idea that students should be able to write sound arguments on substantive topics and issues. And our standards call this out as critical to career and college readiness. I always like to say that it's not just about career and college readiness, it's also about life readiness. We need to be able to develop these skills of argumentation because they are important as we are interacting with others. We want our students to be in their 30s and their 40s and their 70s and engaging in an appropriate argument discourse at a dinner party they might be having. And so it's yes, critical to career and college readiness, but it's really beyond that also. When students are interviewing for a job, coming up and drawing up their resume, there is a level of understanding argumentation and knowing your audience and how you are making claims and your evidence and your reasoning for why you might be the best candidate for a job, right? And so argumentation is more than just career and college readiness. and being able to take what we know about argumentation and build that into the academic, an academic framework. So I love to call out this slide. I really love this, this longitudinal study from the University of Chicago, about 30 years or so. And some of you may know of this study or of studies similar to this out of the University of Chicago. But the idea here is that there are certain practices that students can engage in that show a rise in subtest scores. And you can see the English class practice, and then you can see in the second column the rise in subtest score. The third column is if it's applied during ThinkCERCA, and I'm not going to talk about that now, but the study is one of the big foundations of ThinkCERCA. But what we see is that when students engage in, let's say writing through collaboration, that's the fourth row down, there's a 0.38 increase in their subtest score. When students might be defending their point of view 5 or more times, compared to less than 5, there's a large rise in their English subtest score. Similarly, looking at math practices, there are certain things like discussing science practices, thinking about evidence claims, the importance of lab reports, thinking about disciplinary literacy and disciplinary writing, thinking like a biologist versus thinking like a poet and writing like a poet. And so I like to call this out because we have known for a very long time that there are certain practices that are going to support our students and really lead to growth. And so I love to call this out because I think that we can see very concretely what some of those practices are. And so with that, I'm going to shift into 5 strategies for increasing rigor through close reading and argumentative writing through this idea of a comprehensive literacy program. So what I am going to focus on here is the idea of a common language, collaboration in the classroom, the importance of rigorous instruction, how to and what is personalization or personalized learning in the classroom, and finally, argumentation. So I'll loop back to what we talked about in the beginning around argumentation. Before I move forward, I am just going to do a quick toggle to the chat. So bear with me. Okay, great. No questions that are critical for me to respond to at this point. Again, I'll take a chat probably after rigorous instruction or maybe after personalization. I'll take another break then. So chat in any questions that you have as we dig through. All right, so a common language. Why common language? Why is common language important? When we use a common language, we can remove content areas from these silos. We support our students as they're able to build the abilities to read critically, to evaluate and synthesize information, really regardless of what content they might be in or even the media that they are exposed to. And I call that out because we know that assessments are not always giving students a passage. They may give our students a passage or multiple passages or 2 passages and a YouTube clip. And so there are other media that our students need to be thinking about how they can read critically, evaluate, and synthesize information. Having common language, we can really lead to an improvement on academic rigor because we have more cohesion. But the really big idea here on common language is that it leads to an alignment in instructional practice and goals across a school, a district, or even a larger system. And so thinking that going back to this first idea of content areas being in silos, that there is a lot more cohesion. And by having this alignment, we can be very explicit and clear with our students around what's expected across and within different content areas. And so the CERCA framework is this idea of common language, that students are engaging in a claim. How are they writing a claim when they might respond to a piece of poetry? How might they come up with a claim when they are reading and responding to nonfiction, whether it's in maybe a US history class or a chemistry class or their geometry class? And so as students are being held accountable to and preparing themselves for these new assessments, and I will say I use new assessments a little vaguely because in some cases it's new assessments and others we're about a year into some assessments that students are taking, or maybe even 2 years. But these newer assessments, students really have to develop these discipline-specific language skills so that they can make arguments across subjects. I mentioned earlier that I have a few screenshots from assessments in here, and I think that that'll draw a very clear connection to what these assessments are asking students to do as they relate to this idea of making arguments. And these 5 components or 5 pieces of coming up with an argument. So here's an excerpt from a few different assessments. So you can see a math, there's a science in the bottom, and then there is a poetry. And so across these different assessment excerpts, students need to explain their reasoning, whether it is with a math prompt. They need to think about multiple pieces of text and explain their reasoning. And they need to cite their evidence. So they need to dig into whether it's a visual or actual text, and they need to be able to pull evidence and use that evidence as they are supporting their writing, proving their point. And so evidence is really critical. This means that our students need to be practicing citing evidence, finding evidence in multiple content areas. And that by having that consistent and common language, that terminology of evidence, then students can see what that looks like in science versus what that might look like in math or ELA. So here's another example. And I don't know if you can tell from the screen, but this is actually 3 different texts that students are going to be engaging in. You can see one of them, the Tinker v. Des Moines opinion written by Justice Fortas. Below that, there's one by Justice Black, and then there is an audio clip at the bottom. And so students need to now read and listen to multiple sources, pieces of information, media, and they need to analyze their argument. So we see here that this is not only a skill they need to engage in perhaps an ELA class, but this might be concepts and topics that they are learning about and talking about in an American history course. Many high schools do have the ability to have much more specific, granulated topics around courses. So maybe there is a specific course around this time period that a high school may offer. And so students will need to engage in analyzing arguments, thinking about arguments that are presented to them, and then dig even more into that. So it's not just about writing, but also about analyzing what's been presented to them. And so that common language across content areas is going to be beneficial and really critical for students to be successful. Here's one more. This is from the SAT. And so students, in this case, are not actually writing a response, but they need to match claims with evidence. So again, now we're seeing students need to engage in the writing, they need to identify, and they need to match up, in a sense, different pieces together. And so by having this in multiple courses, again, there is the practice in multiple places for students to engage in. Here's another one where students are interpreting data, and then again, matching claims using evidence. I believe this is social studies, content-wise, that is. So that's the idea of common language and how we can build a structure and a system in place that we have common language across content areas. So the next strategy we're going to focus on is collaboration. So this can be a really tricky slide, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the big takeaway I just want to call out is that as it relates to NAEP results, when students are discussing interpretations of what they read, every day, or almost every day, they're scoring higher. And so what we need students to engage in is the ability to discuss and talk as much as they can in the classroom, and that requires a system and a structure for collaboration. And so collaboration can look like a lot of different things. For administrators, this might mean that you need to make sure that you're scheduling time for collaboration to happen, especially for teachers. So there's a collaboration in the classroom, which we'll talk about in a moment. But for teachers to collaborate so they can work together and work on that common language, there needs to be some sort of scheduled time. It might not be during the school day, it may be outside of the school day, maybe over email. For teachers, as they begin to collaborate, being able to find at least one colleague to work with. I love this idea of, starting your work with maybe just two people, and then slowly bringing in others by getting feedback and suggestions from them. And that we want to be comfortable in informal spaces. So those of us who are working or have worked in schools, we know that the copier is a hot spot for conversation. And so sometimes that you're always making copies at 7:05 in the morning, and so is your colleague Kathy, and that is a real person that I worked with, and she and I were always making copies between 6:45 and 7:15 in the morning. And we shared students, and it was a great opportunity for us to, yes, make our copies, but also talk about things that we were working on together. And so that's the teacher or the administrator side of collaboration. But then for the student side of collaboration, although I will say these strategies can be used with teachers and administrators too. But for the student side, there's a few different strategies that are tried, tested, true. Having a think, pair, share, pretty simple, but giving students the opportunity to not just respond, raising their hand and give you a response when you ask a question, but turning to a partner, talking with a partner. A variation on this is something called think, pair, square, where students might have a partner and then partner up with another group of partners. Having students collaborate to find evidence. Yes, students eventually need to be doing this on their own, but there's no reason why they can't be doing, search for evidence with a partner for a little bit of time. And I think about the jobs that we lead, but also the jobs that other people in our lives might lead, and collaboration to find answers and to dig into data is something, whether that data is, we're working with customers, or whether that data is, usage on our website, traffic on our website, whatever that might be. We do work with others. And so building in opportunities for students to practice that. Having students engage in a debate, which is so much fun, but of course has to be planned and prepped appropriately. Engaging in a Socratic discussion. I always say here that the Socratic discussion or Socratic dialogue is something I always wanted to do in my classroom, but I never felt like I had the right resources to be successful. And so my thought was, instead of winging it, I'm just not going to do it. But having structures and systems in place to do a Socratic discussion or dialogue is a great way to have students engage in more collaboration. And then peer-to-peer editing. So having students read and respond to their classmates' work and vice versa, giving a very specific focus. So to jump back this idea of a common language, maybe they're giving feedback on their partners or their peers' claims. Maybe they're focusing on evidence. So giving a structure, and then also giving the opportunities for them to work with one another. So I do want to call out that at ThinkCERCA, we do have some resources for each of these strategies. I wish that the Socratic discussion one existed when I was in the classroom. So I do want to just call out the fact that we do have some of these resources, and I'm sure some of you may be using similar strategies in your classroom. Maybe you have colleagues that you can learn from and share with as you dig into practice. And we want to make sure that we're creating spaces for collaboration. And I mean that in a very physical way. Is our classroom set up in a way that students can collaborate? I'm going to breeze through a handful of slides that just show some visuals of what this could look like. So students might be partnering up or working in groups. So you see here, 2 students are doing some peer collaboration. Students might be in partners. They might be working independently, but in a center. So there's still a level of collaboration there where the product or the output is something they're doing, but they might be talking about it with others. That might be the vocabulary center, for example, that you see here. They're engaging in a discussion. There's some peer editing, independent online reading, or perhaps this is guided reading groups or literature circles, book clubs. And so what you see here is very clearly you see two groups, but then there's two others on the outside. There's also two more groups that we don't see in the frame at all. So there's 6 groups in this classroom. In the group up front, there's 4 students and 2 laptops, so they're using a bit of technology. The group that we see in the back, we see there is a young man holding up a piece of paper talking. We see a young lady across from him is talking to him, and everyone's facing and turning towards her. So there's conversation happening, there's collaboration. Up front, we see these 2 young men in the front are looking at a computer together. So building up structures and systems, they're all sitting in groups of 4 or 5. Another possibility is having everyone work on a similar similar center. So everyone may be reading, but they are grouped perhaps by reading level. So here you see something similar. So everyone's in groups of 4. I think one group is a group of 6, but everyone's in groups. They are all working independently, but they are set up to also work in groups. And because they are all reading the same passage or working on the same piece of text, then they can collaborate. This is, some of you may know this school. It isn't, I believe it is in Illinois. But you see multiple teachers, and you see multiple things happening here, as there are no walls between these different groups, where students have instruction from a teacher up front. They're collaborating in this group that's sort of in the foreground. The students that are against the wall, they're working all independently. And then in theory, they could rotate. So they have opportunities to work and collaborate with peers, and opportunities to learn explicitly from a teacher, and they have opportunities to work independently. And so when we encourage collaboration for our students, we're giving opportunities for them to work with one another, to deepen their understanding. But what's really great is we also allow them to share their strengths while also building in their areas of need. All of our students have strengths, and collaborations is a great way for us to be able to tap into that so that they can, in a sense, show off their strengths and also continue to build in other areas. With ThinkCERCA, this might seem a bit abstract because we haven't actually talked about ThinkCERCA yet. But in the middle blue bar, we have 6 steps of every single one of our lessons where they're connecting, they're reading, engaging with the text, they're summarizing, they're building an argument. But at every single step of the way, there is a very clear point where you can have students, yes, work independently, but then have them with a partner or in small groups, engage in some deep collaboration. And so building more of that into the classroom is really important. All right, so I'm going to talk about rigorous instruction, and then I'll take a pause for any questions. So if you have something that you want to ask, please type it in. So rigorous instruction, and the idea with rigorous instruction is that we want our students to be able to, yes, create their own meaning, but think deeply about skills and being able to apply to real-world problems, especially when they might be in an environment that is abstract or complex. And so this has implications when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to instruction, and when it comes to assessment. I'm going to focus in on instruction here, but we do want to think, as we implement rigorous instruction, there are multiple ways to think about this as it relates to curriculum. So what a student needs to know, be able to do, and assessment, how we will know if they've even learned it. We're going to focus in on instruction for here and now. We can always follow up on another date around the other 2 or how these all fit together. And so when we think about instruction, I like to jump into this idea of understanding text complexity. That text complexity is really just that. It is complex. It's not really just about quantitative. There is a qualitative level. Then we also need to consider our reader, and we need to consider the task that our student, our reader, is being held to. So I am unsure of what everyone's grade level experience might be. So some of you may know Captain Underpants, some of you might not. But our perception might be that Captain Underpants is probably a lower quantitative level than Of Mice and Men or Farewell to Arms. But in reality, Captain Underpants is a level of 920. I think you can probably assume what Captain Underpants is about based on the title and the visual right there. But it actually is a higher Lexile level. And so And so we do need to think beyond just quantitative. And then teachers need to be considering, the purpose of the text. Does the text align with standards? Does it meet demands of a performance task? And then those elements. So yes, the quantitative measures, and those are important, but then there's also the structure, the level of meaning, language clarity, knowledge demand. Is a text appropriate for a 5th grader? Is it appropriate for a 10th grader? And so really digging deeper into those ideas of levels of meaning. Even, I'm sure many of us would say that we read texts when we were in high school, and perhaps we read them again later on in adulthood, and we get something more and different out of it. And so keeping that in mind with our students. The students really need to be given an opportunity to build a meaningful continuum of knowledge in their content areas, while they're also being introduced to increasingly complex key skills and concepts. And so thinking about this continuum of knowledge and skills is very important. Is very important as we think about rigorous instruction. So a few quick examples from the redesigned SAT. Students need to really understand what makes a sound and cohesive argument. And so dig deep into what is already there and analyze it. And the idea that rigorous instruction is part of a larger structure. This is University of Chicago has these 5 essentials: effective leadership, collaborative teachers, involved families, supportive, collaborative environment. But rigorous instruction is a key piece to that. So those 5 essentials in a school, we know how important those other 4 are, but rigorous instruction is one piece of that. And so making sure that that's part of any structure as we think about the work that's happening in our school or in our district. So we're going to jump into personalization, but I'll take a pause. So give me one moment to X out of my, there we go. All right, so I'm seeing some questions around how ThinkCERCA enables personalized lessons and thinking about metrics of the ThinkCERCA platform. So I'm actually going to hold those questions until I finish these last 2 strategies, because then I'll jump into the platform and I think I can answer it much better when I'm actually showing you ThinkCERCA. So I'm just going to hold those questions, but I will respond to them, I promise. And so keep asking questions as we go through. I will stop at the end of the webinar, answer questions, and then jump right into the ThinkCERCA platform. All right, so we'll jump into personalization or personalized learning. And I have 2 different quotes here. And it's the idea of what is personalized learning. And personalized learning is this idea that we are really thinking about our students' needs. We are putting our students first, in a sense. We're thinking about what they need to learn, the structure of how, when, where they might learn something, and in a sense, tailoring to their individual needs and skills. So this can look like a few things. I have 2 examples. Sorry about that. I have 2 examples here to share. So one is the Universal Design for Learning framework, which may look familiar to some of you, and the other is more of a tiered framework, perhaps RTI, MTSS. So I'll talk really briefly about what this means as it relates to personalized learning. So the Universal Design for Learning framework, and I mentioned at the beginning, it's what I focused on during my PhD program, and really the core of my dissertation, and something that I am very passionate about and I teach courses on right now. And this is really a framework that focuses on curriculum development. Sometimes I think that curriculum development is a bit of a misnomer there because it's really about taking a step back from what we're doing in the classroom. So it might not be going all the way back to the publishers of our curriculum, but thinking about how we're taking the different pieces of our teaching and putting it all together for our students. And as we're doing so, we're considering goals of our classroom, how we're using different methods and materials, and how we might be assessing our students differently. And all of this is related to ideas of engagement, how students might be engaged, interested, seeing relevancy in what they're learning. Representation, so how we as educators or resources that we're using are sharing with our students. Perhaps we are clarifying words, perhaps we are supplying background knowledge building schema, as well as action and expression. So, maybe not all my students have to write a paragraph or a 5-paragraph essay. Maybe some of them can do a play, or they can do a video, or they can draw a visual, because they're going to express their learning in a variety of different ways, but I'm holding them accountable to the same type of content. So using a rubric, for example, would be really beneficial there. Another one I have here, the visual on the other side of the screen, is this tiered model, that we have this idea of using evidence-based practices. And that might be one practice or multiple practices as we think about the different tiers of students. I'm noticing that you probably cannot see the green. That's the more one-on-one intervention. We're using evidence-based practices, and we're using data, very effectively using data to make instructional decisions, both academically and behaviorally. And the reason why that data is so important is because, as I mentioned earlier about personalized learning, we want to think about our students' individual needs and how we can support them. And so that might be collecting data, and maybe it is concrete data, how they performed on a comprehension quiz. Maybe it's observational data as it relates to behavioral needs, or trying to figure out maybe what some triggers are to certain behaviors. But being able to have a structure and a system in place to collect information and have data on students so that you can then implement some evidence-based practices. And that we're providing feedback to students. So it's really important as we're personalizing learning that we are providing students with effective feedback. It's one of the benefits of being able to personalize learning is that feedback is going to be so critical and personalized, for lack of a better word, for each student. So we want to be able to give feedback on the process for students, feedback on the task that students are engaging in, perhaps on self-regulation. We don't want to give feedback on self. This is really tightly connected to ideas of growth mindset. But how are we really giving feedback that is helpful for learning, and reminding ourselves of that as we're giving feedback? I have worked in many schools that have said their focus for the year is going to be around feedback to students. And so making sure that if we say something like that, or if we're focusing on how we're giving feedback to students, that we are thinking about what we're giving feedback on and what we are not giving feedback on. So there's this article that came out of Columbia in 2015, out of Teachers College in 2015, and it talked about engagement and how students might be engaged as I mentioned engagement earlier, thinking about personalized learning and the Universal Design for Learning framework. And the idea that perhaps a more conventional model has fewer students engaged. So it's a very fixed model, fixed reading and assignments, fixed task. Perhaps they're not getting feedback. Maybe they're not really that engaged. Whereas when we think about giving more flexibility and personalization, individual assignments, individual tasks, that students are getting feedback. So there's this rapid performance feedback that students might have a better sense of accomplishment, higher student engagement, and that they are going to then have a higher achievement. And so this is based out of an article that looked at numerous studies around how do we close the achievement gap, and what are researchers and studies saying about the achievement gap. And this is a big piece. So how are we building more engagement into the classroom and giving feedback to students? And so personalized learning is a way to have students be more engaged and then also give feedback in an effective and appropriate way to all students. And then finally, we're going to talk briefly about argumentation. And I'm not going to dig into each of these pieces of argumentation, the research on argumentation. On our ThinkCERCA website, we have a webinar that I did earlier this year. I think it was probably in June or July, around argumentation and the research on argumentation. I like to just call out a few that we know judgment skills are important to support students with and teach them. And so argumentation is a way to do that by having them engage in argumentation. But the research I love the most about this is the one around the relevance of argumentation. So if any of you teach young children, or have young children, or have grown children who were once toddlers, perhaps, as my son is, argumentation is a really relevant skill. The concept of argumentation is something that comes naturally to a lot of us. And so it's really about the academic side of it. And so how do we take a skill that does come naturally and support and cultivate it in an academic environment? And so that loops back to ideas of having common language, thinking about how students can have learning be more personalized. And so there's a few other pieces of research around skill development, and obviously the importance of multiple viewpoints, having students engage in communication. The academic discourse that's really necessary, that connects a lot with this idea of the relevance of argumentation, and the preparation for career and college readiness. And so what we want is classrooms that instill these important literacy skills where students are engaging. There's a common language, there's opportunities for argumentation. I apologize, hit that too quickly. There's opportunities for argumentation, that learning is personalized, that it's rigorous instruction, and that students are getting the opportunity to collaborate and work with peers and one another. So here's, again, an example. This is from the ACT, which perhaps may not be relevant to many of you who are now doing the redesigned SAT in your high schools. But if there is anyone on the line that the ACT is relevant for, this is an essay, and you see students are reading, and then they need to develop a point of view, connect claims with evidence, address counter-arguments. These are all the things that students need to then be engaging in when they jump into a passage and expectation on assessments. So this is the big idea of a comprehensive literacy program, with a focus on rigorous instruction, how we build more rigor in the classroom and engage in argumentation. So again, this idea of a common language and how important that is, building opportunities for collaboration, especially in the classroom with our students, but also having those opportunities for teachers and administrators, rigorous instruction, and thinking about the text, the task, the reader, all those pieces put together instead of being very narrow in our view. Personalized learning and how we are using data and thinking about all the learners in our classroom. And then engaging in skills of argumentation for students, and how we can then take all of that to go towards closing the achievement gap. And so I have a few more slides here, and I will actually use them to introduce ThinkCERCA, and then I'll jump back to the chat and open up ThinkCERCA in a new window. It seems like a little bit of an awkward shift, but to quickly share with you all ThinkCERCA and what the ThinkCERCA platform does, I do want to call out beforehand that we have seen some amazing growth in the schools that are using ThinkCERCA. The ThinkCERCA was found to have an extremely large impact, producing basically about a year's extra academic growth for students. This is a LEAP study. These are all external studies that have been conducted on schools using ThinkCERCA. They are outperforming their peers nationally when using ThinkCERCA. And so the idea is that we really want to be transforming education where it matters most. So how are we taking all these different pieces, unifying schools and districts around coherent and rigorous critical thinking instruction? How we can support teachers, how we can increase engagement for students, and increase those challenges in the content that students are going to be encountering and experiencing in the classroom. So thank you so much. And I'm going to jump into the ThinkCERCA platform. And as that's happening, let me just see if any other questions have come up. So please do ask other questions. Perfect. And as you are doing that, I will really quickly share with you the ThinkCERCA platform, and then Jat, I'll pass it over back to you. So this is the ThinkCERCA platform. When teachers log in, this is, and administrators, actually, this is what they'll see. We're in the midst of, for many schools, mid-year assessments. So this little pop-up says, heads up, we've got our mid-year assessments here for you. And so there's a lot of filters on the side. So you can filter by type of lesson, by subject, by grade level, by standard. There's a drop down here. And then some of our ThinkCERCA themes as well. But this idea of how we personalize learning, I'm actually going to jump to this other little page here, which is by CERCA set. So a CERCA set, and I'm going to pick up the one that I am most interested in, which is the role of machines. And I say this because I, at this point, it wasn't recently, it was probably almost a year ago, saw the movie Ex Machina, which if you've not seen, is a fantastic movie, but it really gets you thinking about the role of machines and robots and artificial intelligence. And so what you see here is the CERCA set. The direct instruction is the piece that's actually directly teaching a skill or a concept to students. The applied reading and writing lesson, which I'm going to dig into, but you'll notice that each of these is at a different reading level. They say grade level. So this is really where that personalization fits in. What this means is that everybody is reading about the role of machines, and they're all thinking about this overarching question. What are the positive and negative effects of technology? However, the personalization and the differentiation, really thinking about the needs of your student, play in here, where I know that 4 of my students are reading at a 4th grade level. So they're reading this article on the Amish, which is, Will New Technology Change the Amish Way of Life? The students who might be at a 7th grade level are reading Watson, a game changer for science. And they were going to respond to this idea of, should society rely on artificial intelligence for important matters such as medical care? And then my students who are maybe at an 11th grade level are going to be reading about the moral case for drones. So should drones be used in warfare instead of human soldiers? But after they finish all those reading, actually I would not say after, even during, they can still get to this big idea of the positive and negative effects of technology. And so this is how students are engaging in personalized learning, but still being able to engage in conversations with their classmates. So I'll jump into the 7th grade Watson, a game changer for science, to show you what then students will actually do. And so this is still all the teacher view. We have resources, you see the standards, the prompt, but I'll jump directly into, here we go, directly into the student view. And again, I don't remember, but I showed a slide that had 6 steps: connecting, read, engaging, summarizing, building, and then creating their CERCA. And these are the 6 steps that students will participate in almost all of our lessons. Our math lessons look a little different in terms of how students are engaging with the math topics. But students are going to read an overview. They'll make a connection step. So describe a time when technology has let you down. What was the problem? How'd you fix the issue? I think we can all do this. Again, I'm sure we all can probably think of an example from last week of the time technology has let us down. But what's great here is that there's the personalization here, in that students have this to respond to, but also the opportunities to collaborate. So maybe instead of having my students respond here, I'm going to have my students partner up or get in groups and actually talk about how a time that technology has let them down, what the problem was, and how they might fix the issue. Students then read a text. This is from Science News for Kids. I just like to call out that all of our texts, and obviously the other resources like whether it's a slide deck or a video or a different visual, they're authentic. They are, as one of my colleagues say, found out in the wild, in that if you were to Google this title and Science News for Kids, this is the exact article you would find. We don't make any changes to it in-house so that students can see what they would actually see in the real world. And so you'll see articles here from the Smithsonian, from the New York Times, from lots of different resources, magazines and newspapers for students. Students then engage in a comprehension check. So this is one piece of feedback that students are getting. We talked about the importance of immediate and relevant feedback. And so, okay, my feedback here is that I got them all wrong. But there's a learning experience, and there's a teaching opportunity here for students to either do this as a class or even with a partner or one other person in the classroom. I just saw a question come through around reports or reviews for teachers, administrators, and parents, and I will share that with you just as I finish these last few steps. Students then engage with the text. We have some prompts here. Use aqua to highlight reasons computers can answer questions better than all humans. Pink for reasons humans can answer better. So students can actually highlight, they can take some notes, all while teachers are seeing everything students are doing. So my teacher knows, my teacher knows that I got a 0 here. My teacher knows what I'm highlighting. So I can, as a teacher, see what and how students are responding and engaging to the text. Students should summarize. Should make this a little larger. Students should summarize. And we give some prompts, sentence frames to help out. And then students are going to build their argument. This is obviously not the appropriate claim here. But the reason why I put that one in there is because we give some examples of what students could begin with. So students can put their claim, their reason, their evidence. As a teacher, you might say, I want 3 pieces of evidence. A student can play around with this. It's interactive. And then they take everything and they work on their final piece of writing. So that's what the student engages in. And get back to this idea of how we're engaging in personalized learning. The students might all be doing the same steps, but they can work at a just right level or an appropriate level for them. So one question is, well, how do students actually figure out their level, or how does the teacher figure out their level? And that's through, you saw that pop-up about mid-year assessments. We have benchmark assessments or leveling, which include a leveling assessment. And so if schools don't have something that levels their students, this is what they can use. So there is a little bucket of assessments that students might take, and that can give you the information so that you can determine what level students might be on. And then as a teacher, you've got a few options in terms of what you can see. So I can, as the teacher, there's 2 pieces here. One, I can dig into my individual classes. This is just, I only have 1 class here in this account. I can look at the class roster, can look at all the assignments. This is where I will, as it pops up, this is where I can look perhaps at individual students. Have they performed on a percentage on a comprehension check? There we go. Let's find one that's been graded. Here we go. So I'm seeing, wow, look at this class. Every single student got a 100% on the comprehension check. This is where also for the writing, teachers can see what still needs to be graded by them. So teachers can then engage in the grading and give feedback to students. But then there is a bigger picture, this Insight tab. I'm jumping to something different. I do want to be respectful of our time. This Insight tab is the bigger picture report. So Jack, to your question about reports, this is something that teachers can look at, in that they can see by class. Because this is a teacher account, I only have 1 option. But I can see in my class who hasn't started the writing, how many students are at a level of proficiency, how many are not yet proficient. This is the teacher evaluated, that's the writing. You notice all those students that needed work to be graded. And then there's the automated assessment. Has already been graded. That's what I got a 0 on as a student when I clicked, when I did A for every single answer. And then you can dig in deeper to each piece of information for students and look at perhaps strands or standard performance over time. And so this Great. And so this is the view for teachers. Administrators have the same view, but for all teachers. And then district level administrators, again, have the same view, but for all teachers across all the schools that they are an administrator for. So to give a very concrete example, we work with a district that has 13 schools. And so the administrators at the central office level have one account that looks similar to this, but instead of performance by class, they can pick their school and then they can pick the teacher to dig into the data. The principals or the APs at each of those schools have accounts to dig into each of the teacher and student data, and then the teachers have access to all of their information. So another question just popped up around roster information. We have what I think is actually a pretty awesome and easy way to do rosters. I'm clicking on under classes, manage school roster. Basically, schools will upload a roster. It is that simple. We need student names, we need email addresses, and that is pretty much the quickest way to upload a roster. You can also then manage rosters once they're there in case maybe you have a student that left, or maybe a student for some reason ended up with 3 accounts under 3 different email addresses. So all the different things that we can help with. But yes, that's how we roster students into the ThinkCERCA platform. So I'm not seeing any other questions, so I am going to stop sharing my screen, but still give an opportunity for people to ask questions if any pop up. So if chat, if you have any questions, or if anyone else has questions that they would like to chat in or ask, please do.
Yeah. So again, feel free. People are muted. They can unmute themselves and ask any questions verbally, or they can type them into the chat while people are doing that. This was incredibly valuable, Kavita, and I think the platform is very impressive. So questions, folks. Talked about reporting. We talked about rostering. We talked about the kind of instructional usage of the platform. What other questions that people might have? I think there was an earlier question about being able to share this out to other departments and organizations. So unless, Kavita, you have a different view, I don't see any issues with kind of sharing out the webinar with various other
absolutely.
folks.
Yeah, absolutely share it out with, colleagues or, other departments or organizations. Feel free to, of course. And, if any of you have any follow-up questions after the fact, you can send me an email. Jat, I don't know if when the email or the notice for this webinar went out, if there was contact information on that, but we can always follow up with contact information as well. But yes, of course, please feel free to share the recorded session to your colleagues.
Fantastic. Well, we've got just about on time. So if there's no remaining questions, again, this webinar will be posted to the IlliniCloud YouTube channel. So feel free to go out there and give it another look through, or send it out to your colleagues or other folks that may be interested. With that, I'd like to say, again, thank you, Kavita, for taking the time to walk us through this ThinkCERCA platform. Again, I'm very impressed, and I'm very happy with what we were able to share with the broader team today, and thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. This is wonderful. It was great to virtually and sort of connect with all of you, but email, please, if you have any questions.
Fantastic. And again, for folks that need more information, feel free to reach out to me, and I will send out a follow-up email with Kavita's contact information for folks to have direct access to. So,
perfect. Thanks, Jack.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone. And Kavita, thank you again.
All right.
And
take care, everyone.
signing off.
Have a good rest of your week.
All right. Bye-bye.